Could you imagine walking into your office in the morning, flip open your laptop, sit in there, get started, and all of a sudden you get a little prompt pops up in the corner of your laptop and it says, please meet me at the boardroom. So you go over there, and what do you have to meet you and greet you? You have a member from HR, your manager, and a director sitting there waiting to have a conversation. And you wonder, what's this all about? This can't be good. No, because that's usually quite often a scenario that many people find themselves in when they're on the verge of getting laid off, when they're on the verge of losing their job, particularly in the corporate environment. Now, we've heard some major layoffs in the federal government coming up this year, and it's absolutely horrific. Things are going on. Many have lost their jobs. About 100,000 already have been getting their walking papers. Welcome back to the hustle and welcome back to the grind, everybody. And today we want to talk about what's going on in the mighty world of corporate, in the mighty world of the federal government, and layoffs, how they're imminent, how job security is no longer what it used to be. I want to talk about some of this in a little bit more depth, some experience, some things I've heard, and certainly some things that you can take action on so you're not the victim of falling flat on your face, losing your job, and potentially losing your home, cars, and everything else. Now, that is truly a tragic fact. When many people, they set out in their career, they believe that they're going to sit in a job for many, many years. Quite often they find it doesn't take very long, and all of a sudden the word L shows up. Layoffs. That's a common denominator. I mean, we've heard this year 280,000 jobs were lost last year in the tech sector. About 3,600 jobs at Meta were even let go. Now they're talking on the federal level, there could be as many as 2 million jobs lost here. Groups from NHTSA, the EPA, and also losing like 65% of their job force. Of course, IRS and just about every other organization within the US federal government is on the potential chopping block. Things aren't shaping up too well these days, and certainly the talk of layoffs is imminent. And it's not just the federal government in the US and Canada. We're talking these tariffs are likely going to have a major impact on Canadian government, on Canadian workers. I mean, if they start moving metal or start importing metals in the US from other countries, that's going to have an impact to Canada's exports. Certainly, as well as the automotive sector, as they start to move vehicles more into the US, you're going to find less of those manufacturing jobs in Canada. Hence, many layoffs. I mean, this just cycle goes round and around. But with DOGE involved now in the US, it's basically looking for efficiencies. You better believe there seems to be an absolute wave of layoffs coming. Yes, while many of these people are given severances, some of them are giving some time. They have to serve a little time and then walk out. It doesn't matter. Every arrangement's a little bit different. Doesn't matter whether you're working for the US government or you're just working for some private business or even a corporation. A lot of times these scenarios are so different and so stressful. I mean, those days where you go out there and you think you're going to work for 35, 40 years and then call it quits, retire, get your golden ring and move on, those days with the defined benefits pension are few and far between. There are many people these days that are able to sustain that. And I like to sort of follow, I've talked about this, the idea of enjoying life, certainly balancing your life as best you can. You've got to enjoy it, and if you've got hobbies, don't resist your hobbies, but do it in a controlled fashion. I mean, ultimately, my opinion is have your finances in order first before you start splurging. Essentially, look at your mortgage, cars. Don't get into big hawk, particularly as you get into retirement. You want to make sure you're clear of that. But here, there's nothing worse than being trapped. And so ultimately, what gets a lot of people snookered are huge loans, mortgages. I mean, could you imagine that individual that just bought their house last year, they expanded, they upgraded, bought a house, they got deep into a mortgage payment of $2,500 a month or $3,000 a month. Then this year they decided they needed a new truck. Now all of a sudden they're making a $1,200 payment there. Lo and behold, 4 months later, they lose their job, the walk-in papers. This is a phenomenon that's way too common and way too sad because it can literally turn your life upside down. And it's heartbreaking to see when people not just have to adapt, but have to turn their life upside down, because that's quite often what ends up happening. A person's life is never again the same, or at least it often takes years to get back on their feet. See, what we're seeing all over the sector is more and more layoffs. U.S. government's gone through many layoffs. They've gone through some record-breaking layoffs in history, certainly, but this one is one of the big ones. We're talking as many as 2 million employees, when it's all said and done, may be looked at looking for new jobs. And what does that mean for people, that are older? When we've talked about this before, the older workforce that they're continuing on, they're trying to get finishing off their careers. They're certainly trying to just enjoy life, finish off at, 60, 65, many people try. But unfortunately, getting trimmed off at the wings, sadly, just puts them in a real predicament, especially when you're 50, 51, 52. Ageism is a real factor, and having to re-enter the workforce at that age is nothing short of an extreme challenge. Okay, so before I continue on here, I just want to stop, and it's one of these days that you've got to stop and smell the roses. Honestly, it's been a run. This last year has been absolutely trying, and I like to stop, and when I see a nice little piece of scenery, and some people see this as a bunch of snow and a patch of weeds, I actually see this as a cute little green space, and certainly in the summertime, it's absolutely beautiful. So sometimes, I just like to stop, take a moment. A lot of people have asked, what do you do? Well, the fact is, I do a fair amount. I'm very busy at home, projects. But when I do these walks, I actually, a lot of times when I turn off the camera, I take those moments. A lot of people are like, well, all you do is work and hustle, side hustle, work, side. And yeah, I'm very active at that. But I just like to look around and just enjoy, take a few sips. And just enjoy what the scenery is. Just enjoy the fruits of what we have around us. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, you live in the frozen Arctic, and yeah, we get usually a couple months of potential really nasty weather, but the rest of it is kind of more like this, where it's, you're around 0, -5, +5. It's comfortable. It's not amazing. Slippery conditions like this just means it's potentially hazard. Take a look. Look at all the ice down there. All of this walkway is very, very treacherous. And now I'm having to walk on this little space. So it's kind of nice to have a little bit of these areas. But as I'll show you as I get there, a lot of these places that I'm walking, they're beautiful to look at like this. You got lots of trees. These houses are backed onto this little slough area. But you have these icy conditions. And then look, it's not always like this where you have this little patch you can walk on. I actually have this area now. Now, what do you do with that? That's like a rink. That's a literal rink. Now, I want to talk about that because this brings to mind, because quite a few years ago, I was working a job, and this wasn't the last job I was on or last company. This was a, company beforehand. I actually had this really great job. I loved it, and I keep talking and touting about that job. But I really do. I look retrospectively that it's some of the best employment I've had in my history. So, not all jobs are bad, and I enjoyed that stretch. But I was on a job once, and I was loading up the truck. We were doing some, I believe it was some high voltage cable testing, I think we terminated a 15 kV cable, put some stress cones on it, threw the high pot to it, did some testing. And then I believe we were doing some ductor contact resistance testing on some breakers and switches and insulation integrity tests. And basically doing a full gambit of, electrical testing, high voltage testing on some of the switch gear and cables. And we were doing this work. And it was actually at one of the biggest malls in North America. You take a guess. If you have any idea what that mall would be, please do drop that in the comment section. I'm sure you know exactly what mall I'm talking about. Many of you have probably been there. You know what? I was doing some work there, and we were loading up the truck after doing all this maintenance and this testing. And I went and I was walking briskly back and forth from the electrical room to the outside where we had parked our vehicle. And basically, I was scooting along, probably my last trip back to the van, and I had slipped. I slipped on some ice, and my foot went out from under me like this. And all of this ice that was just basically like this, more or less unkept, because this is a part of what we just deal with. This is life in Canada quite often. It's icy, it's snowy, it's gritty. And I actually took a spill. no doubt. I absolutely took a wipeout, slipped, landed really hard because I ended up slamming my hand down on the bumper of the vehicle, and I ended up shattering my wrist in, I would say, I think it was about 4 or 5 pieces. My entire wrist was shattered. Like it almost needed a full rebuild or overhaul. But what ended up happening was I looked down at my wrist. Instantly, you have this panic. You have this sort of state of shock kicking in. And fortunately, I had a coworker with me. He scooted me over to a hospital, which was right nearby. And we checked in there, and I sat in the emergency room or the waiting room while lots of people sat there, and it was quite full. There's a lot of people. But I'm sitting there with my wrist all deformed and swollen and hurting like there's no tomorrow. And of course I check in. Next thing you know, yes, got the x-ray. It's broken in a bunch of pieces. That night I had to come back. They basically put a temporary sling and wrapped it lightly. The next day I was in for surgery. They put like 3 or 4 pins in my wrist. And I had to live with that for, I don't know, I believe it was a few months, and come back every once in a while. They cut the cast off, do another scan, and this went on for a few months. And I think back to those days that was not a good situation, certainly not a great experience. But you know what? I hate to say it, what doesn't destroy us makes us stronger, right? Now, I would never suggest that to anybody. It's painful, it hurts, and it puts you out and potentially puts you at risk for losing your job. Because I've seen people on other jobs, like companies before that ended up losing their jobs because they got injured, they wound up in the hospital, had a minor surgery, and then they came out and lo and behold, oh, sorry, here's your layoff papers. This happens so too often. So getting hurt does not help your situation being on the job site. So ultimately, I've learned a few things along the way, and icy sidewalks like this certainly are a situation that aren't wonderful. And it wasn't this icy. I was on here yesterday, and it wasn't like this yesterday. It was snowed over, but it was more of just like the snow. And you could walk on here, and it was sort of abrasive, and it wasn't slippery, really. But all of a sudden, yesterday, we had some pretty warm temps. I think we hit about 8-9 degrees. And lo and behold, I came out here this morning, and it's all sheer ice. So I might have to look for another alternate route here tomorrow. But yeah, it's just another friendly reminder how things can change and how they change so quickly. Just like the weather, it changes overnight. Just like your job status changes overnight. And so all these layoffs are very tragic. I know exactly what it's like. I've experienced layoffs through different times of my life. And my early layoffs, as I've expressed in my earliest video, my kickoff video to this channel, how I explained how basically my entire career in a nutshell, how in my first few years, I sustained a couple consecutive pre-Christmas layoffs. And it was at that time I quickly learned that none of this is permanent, none of it's real. And the more debt that I carried, the more stressed I felt. And so that's all I want to say with all of these imminent layoffs. And we're about to see potentially millions of layoffs in the U.S. federal departments. Certainly, a lot of that's going to trickle over. We're going to see it in other areas. Certainly, Canadians are going to likely see mass layoffs, particularly in some of the provinces. More likely Ontario, where there's a lot of manufacturing. That's where it's really going to get hit hard. Already in Canada, we've seen some of the statistics. I believe we're overall, last time I saw, we were around 7.5, I think 6.9, and it was drifting up. And I think it might have even been up closer to 7.5% layoff rate. That is absolutely extraordinarily high. And it's not good. And it's going to climb, and it's going to get worse. Could you imagine having 10, 12, 15% of your population that is able to work, not working? And see, this is my whole premise of the channel, is that you do work, it's a means to an end, but we all pay our dues, and we all have to work for periods of time, for decades, to build up that nest egg, to build up the opportunity to enjoy some of the things that we like to enjoy and the life that we like to live. So we all have to work, unless we're billionaires, which most of us aren't. And ultimately, it just means, the message here, the takeaway should be, from my perspective and what I've experienced and I've witnessed, I've been firsthand on a recipient of many layoffs throughout the years, because in my early years I was in construction, And that's a normal part of that game. And of course, here very recently, almost a year ago now, almost to the day, as of actually tomorrow, it'll be exactly 1 year. It's just one of those things that, you have to adapt, you have to accommodate for it. And it's a sad state, but people that believe that they're a real company person, that they have the value to offer that the company cannot ignore or deny, then I think you're just missing a bit of the point, because they'll switch you off in a heartbeat. They will turn you around. They will lay you off. And I hate to say it, but realistically, there are, any given day, these corporations could just say, look, we need 1,000, we need 500, we need 10,000. And then they just start picking numbers. And in most cases, it's not even valid numbers. In most cases, especially large scale, large swaths, they quantify it. What I've seen is a lot of times they'll say, well, it's, low performers are getting the axe. And, that's the first point. But that's, in some cases, that's the easy pickings. But I've also heard lots of people that were, successful employees that have had good ratings for the last number of years and still get the boots. I mean, there's multiple factors. A lot of times it's just a numbers game. Sometimes there's other things. How old are you? Just that very factor alone, I hate to say it. If you've ever had maybe a dispute with your manager or maybe a senior leader, don't think that doesn't get noted somewhere. A lot of these corporations, especially in management level, they have feelers and they all talk and they all communicate. And so the idea behind these large swaths is you just never know when you're in that group. And so I even heard somebody this week who's working for a different company, a friend of ours, that he survived it, but apparently there was about 4 dozen people that just got let go in this company locally. And some of them were let go and they were happy about it because a lot of them received sort of a bridge to retirement or received a huge buyout or a pension. But some of them weren't. Some of them were just sort of middle of their career, trying to keep on trucking, thinking they still had 15 years, 20 years in the organization. And many of them got their walking papers. See, that's a common phenomenon, a common theme that many of us just see all too often. We're starting to hear more and more of this. The tech giants are getting crushed. The tech industry. AI now was the hot, now it's not. The EV sector, it's taking a hit. We're seeing a lot of the popularity there going away. Naturally, that's going to have an impact. We see layoffs everywhere. We're seeing it especially in the automotive sector because, even companies in Europe, we're seeing Volkswagen struggling, Mercedes struggling, Porsche. They're all taking a hit and they're all seeing huge decreases in sales numbers. So when sales numbers and stock prices go down, there's going to be cutting, and it's usually somewhere where they can trim some fat, and layoffs are imminent. It's just the name of the game in the corporate environment, and you can't love it, you can't hate it, because it just is what it is, and we've all signed up for that. But the best thing that I can suggest is don't be snookered, don't be caught up. Make sure you have that FU money, or you have a backup plan or an opportunity where if you get that notification, if you have that meeting with HR, that you can walk out of there with your head held high and not feel stressed out. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, everybody. Again, as always, we're just trying to get home in one piece with all these icy sidewalks right here. It's really treacherous. But anyway, hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you real soon. Bye-bye.